Damien here from Billet Proof Designs, coming at you with another great product. Today we're going to briefly discuss our dual and single caliper mounts and go over how to mount them. So here we have our line of caliper mounts. We offer them in a dual caliper mount and a single caliper mount. The singles can be ordered to accommodate a 10-inch or 11.5-inch rotor. They can be used on 3/4 or 1-inch axles. They come with oil impregnated bronze bushings. Some specifics about these. They're used, or they're designed for 3.5-inch spread calipers. Both the single and the dual. They're machined here in-house from 1/2-inch thick 6061. It's a great product with a very minimalist design. They're extremely strong. They have an open configuration with these cutouts to help display that nice rear wheel that you might have. We have them in a brushed finish, and then we have them in a mirror finish polish. Now I'm going to briefly describe how to set these up. We've had a bunch of customers call in and ask how to properly mount these, and there's two ways to go about it. I'll give you the plus and minuses of both, and you can decide how to best do it on your build. So here's a simple little mock-up that we have for display purposes, and this is exactly how it's going to be done on your motorcycle, but it's good for descriptive purposes. So there's two ways to mount this caliper. One would be a trapped orientation where the caliper mount is trapped in between your inboard and outboard spacers on your wheel. And the other way, which I prefer and I think is a better method, is a free floating design where the caliper bracket actually slides or rides on top of the spacer that locates your rear wheel. We all know that the rear wheel is centered in the motorcycle by spacers on each side, in between the bearing and the axle plate. Well, on the one side that you have your caliper, you have to make a decision whether to trap the bracket in between an inboard and an outboard spacer or have this mount, the caliper bracket, ride on top of the spacer. Let's say we're using a 3/4 inch rear axle on your build. One way to do this would be to measure your inboard and outboard spacers, machine your spacers to size. That orientation, you have a trapped caliper bracket. The problem with that is your caliper bracket can't move. So if you had a failure in one of your calipers, for instance, one of the caliper pistons froze in the bore, when you hit the brakes, only one piston is moving. Over time, your brake pad on one side is going to wear more than the other, and that's going to cause this caliper to want to cock the caliper bracket. If it cocks enough, it's going to start wearing into the caliper body. This rotor is going to start gouging that caliper body. The other way to mount this is the free floating, which I said I prefer. So again, using a 3/4 inch axle, we would machine a spacer from the bearing on your wheel to the inside of the axle plate. The ID would be 3/4 of an inch, a little bit oversized for your axle. And then the outside diameter would be 1 inch or just a hair under 1 inch. And that would slide inside this oil impregnated bushing. Being that it's a full free floating design, this caliper bracket is now free to float on that spacer. It really isn't going to float too much because the caliper bracket is trapped by the caliper that goes over top of the rotor. Now, if you did happen to have a failure in one of the pistons and you didn't realize it for a little bit, that bracket will slide a little bit on your spacer, allowing the rotor not to gouge into the caliper body. So there's two ways to go about this. One, you have a trapped bracket, and two, you have a free floating. It's up to you how you want to do it. There's no bad way. There's just preference over one or the other. So now we're going to take a look at the Billet Proof Designs shop bike and show you how I have that set up. On that motorcycle, it's a free floating design, and I have thousands of miles on it with no failure, and it's worked great since I mounted it. All right, so here we have our dual caliper mount mounted to a 3/4 inch axle. It's on a lead sled, hardtail rear end, and I'm using Total Performance 2-piston 3.5 inch spread calipers. These brackets will also accommodate DNA and Ultima calipers, 2 and 4 piston with 3.5 inch spread. So on to mounting this. So the reason I know issues can arise when you have a trapped caliper bracket is because I had one trapped and I didn't realize that one of the pistons froze up in the caliper bore, and I ended up putting a big gouge on the inside of my caliper. So I decided to go to a full floating setup. In order to mount this correctly, the side opposite the caliper, you're going to take a measurement after you have your rear wheel centered, and you're going to machine a spacer that's the correct length between the bearing and the axle plate. On this side, you're going to measure the space in between the bearing and the axle plate. When you do that, make sure your wheel is tight up against the spacer on the opposite side. Now, this particular setup, again, 3/4 inch axle, running the caliper bracket as a floating setup on top of the spacer. So the ID of the spacer measures just over 3/4 of an inch, like 752 is plenty. And the OD is just shy of 1 inch, so 0.999 or 0.998. You want a nice slip fit between the oil impregnated bushing and the spacer. The spacer can be machined from brass, aluminum, stainless steel. This particular setup, it's aluminum. Once that's all done, you have a full floating setup. So if there's any kind of discrepancy in how the brake shoes or brake pads are wearing, that full floating setup will allow the bracket to kind of seek its own center. These can be oriented in any fashion. I have them oriented back here in the 3 o'clock position just to show off the bracket and the calipers. A lot of guys like low center of gravity, so they mount them down low. And here is the brake stay to keep the caliper bracket from rotating when you apply brakes. There's a weld-on brake tab that goes to the lower frame rail, and the brake stay is adjustable to get the desired clock on the orientation of the bracket, and it's secured with a 3/16 cap screw. All right, so there you have it. 2 options on how to mount our single and dual caliper hangers on front and rear axles. For more information on our caliper brackets and other great products from Billet Proof Designs, please visit our website at billetproofdesigns.com. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.